I was signing the form to sell my plasma for $85, just to cover the electric bill, when an old hand pulled the clipboard away. "You will not sign another thing to sell your own blood," he said. He introduced himself as Eamon Caldwell, my grandfather, the billionaire my family claimed was long dead to us. He wasn't there for a reunion. He was there to ask why my trust fund had evaporated by the exact cost of my sister's new engagement ring. "My name is Penelope Green." The antiseptic sting of the plasma clinic on Kensington Avenue was the smell of my failure. It was the smell of my law degree, framed in cheap plastic, hanging in a Fishtown loft I could no longer afford. Outside, Philadelphia was frozen solid, a bitter February wind whipping trash down the avenue. Inside, under fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered, the floor was a geography of old stains. I sat in a plastic chair, my coat still on, my knuckles white as I clutched the laminated intake form. 29 years old, just passed the Pennsylvania bar exam on the first try, and here I was, waiting to sell a part of myself for $85 to keep the heat on. The woman behind the plexiglass partition didn't look up, just gestured with a pen. I was next. I was about to stand up when my phone buzzed, the vibration violent against the hard plastic chair. It was my mother, Vivian Hartley. I ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. I knew this rhythm. This was not a hello call. This was a summons. I declined it and stood, walking toward the counter, my old boots squeaking on the linoleum. Before I could slide the form under the glass, the phone rang again. I sighed, stepping out of line as a man with a hacking cough took my place. "What, Mom?" I said, keeping my voice low. "Penelope, darling, finally, you cannot just ignore your mother." Her voice was smooth, cultured, painfully out of place in this room. "I need you to come home this weekend. We're having a little get-together. There's a big surprise." "I can't. I'm working." I lied. Working. I was doing $30 contract reviews for a delivery app, fighting their algorithm for scraps. "Nonsense. This is important. It's family. Penelope, Saturday, 7 o'clock. Don't you dare be late. And for God's sake, wear something decent. That gray thing you call a sweater won't do." She hung up before I could argue. The man with the cough finished, and the slot was open again. I looked at the form. I looked at the buzzing, indifferent room. I needed the money, but more than that, I suddenly needed to know what lie was big enough to be called a big surprise. I put the form back in my bag and walked out, the cold hitting me like a slap. I would go, but I wouldn't be wearing the gray sweater. Wynwood was another planet. The air smelled different, cleaner, colder, scented with old money and pine trees. The Hartley house, the house I grew up in, loomed behind its perfect iron gates, every window blazing with warm, expensive light. I parked my rusting 20-year-old sedan behind a row of gleaming black German cars and walked up the bluestone path I had been forced to help my father lay one summer. The big surprise was immediately apparent. A massive silk banner, the color of heavy cream, was strung between two of the porch columns. In elegant, looping script, it read, "Congratulations, June Tate. June. My sister, Juniper, 26 years old, an aspiring lifestyle influencer, and the undisputed sun around which the Hartley family orbited, and Tate Ellison, of the Ellison Foundation, the kind of old mainline family that owned buildings, not just lived in them. My own news, passing the bar exam 3 weeks ago, had earned me a text message from my mother. Good, now you can find a real job. There was no banner for that. I stepped inside. The house was packed. Men in soft cashmere sweaters, women in tasteful silk blouses, all holding delicate glasses of champagne. The sound of their polite, murmuring voices was a physical weight. "Penelope, you made it?" My mother, Vivian, glided toward me, a vision in winter white. She kissed the air beside my cheek, her eyes scanning my outfit, a simple black dress, the only decent thing I owned. "Wonderful. Now be a dear and help out. The guests are running out of ice, and the caterer is swamped. You know where the kitchen is." It wasn't a request. It was an assignment. I was not a guest. I was staff. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and navigated the crowd. I saw my father, Graham Hartley, holding court by the fireplace, his face flushed with champagne and success. He was a man who had built a career on looking successful, even as his consulting business bled money. As I passed, hidden by a large floral arrangement, I heard his voice, booming with false confidence. "It's a wonderful match, truly," he was saying to a man I didn't recognize. "Tate's a fine boy, a very fine boy, and frankly," he lowered his voice to a conspiratorial rumble. This wedding is going to solve everything. It's going to clear all the debt." The words hit me. Clear all the debt. A memory, sharp and sudden, flashed in my mind. 3 years ago, when I was drowning in law school applications and needed a deposit for an LSAT prep course, I had asked about my UTEMA account, the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account my grandfather, the one they never spoke of, had supposedly set up for me. "Oh, honey," Vivian had said, waving her hand dismissively. "That's all tied up." A year later, needing to cover a tuition gap. "Penelope, you are so selfish. Your sister needs startup capital for her personal brand. Do you have any idea what good photography costs? She needs it more." 2 months ago, desperate to cover the bar exam registration fee, "Absolutely not." "We are not liquid. You're a smart girl. Figure it out." I figured it out by working 70-hour weeks delivering takeout and reviewing contracts. Living on instant noodles and adrenaline, the numbness that had settled over me in the plasma clinic began to recede. In its place, something else took root. It was cold, sharp, and precise. It was the part of my brain that had just passed the bar. It was a thin, perfect sheet of legal clarity. I walked into the kitchen, but I didn't go for the ice. I bypassed the chaos of the catering staff and went straight to the small pantry, where I'd hidden a bottle of vodka in high school. It was long gone, but the instinct was the same. I needed a moment to think. I leaned against the shelves, the smell of spices and floor wax filling my lungs. I pulled out my phone. The battery was at 42%. I walked back out into the party, just as my father tapped a spoon against his glass. "Friends, family," he beamed. "Vivian and I are so thrilled. If I could have your attention, a little speech." I slipped into the alcove by the stairs, partially hidden by a curtain. I opened the audio recorder app on my phone and pressed the red button. I set the phone on the small wooden ledge behind me. The microphone pointed toward the room. "Tonight," Graham began, "we are not just celebrating 2 people. We are celebrating the joining of 2 great families, the Hartleys and the Ellisons." He spoke for 10 minutes. He praised June's vision and beauty. He praised Tate's character and lineage. He praised my mother's impeccable taste in planning the event. He thanked the caterers. He thanked the florist. He told an anecdote about Tate's grandfather. I stood there, invisible, the guest of honor at my own erasure. This was the big surprise. It wasn't just that they were celebrating June. It was that I, Penelope Green, Juris Doctor, was not worth a single mention. My achievement was invisible because it couldn't be leveraged. It couldn't be sold. It couldn't, unlike this wedding. Clear all the debt. They thought I was weak because I was poor. They thought I was a failed investment. I watched them. I watched June preen under the attention, her hand perfectly placed on Tate's chest. I watched my mother watch Tate, her eyes calculating. I watched my father soak in the applause, a fraud triumphant. A slow, cold certainty settled in my chest. They had made a critical error. They had spent years telling me I was nothing, all while paying for the education that would teach me exactly how to prove them wrong. I was not going to cry. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to beg for a single dollar of my own money ever again. I was going to win. The applause for my father's speech was a wave of static, meaningless and hollow. From my alcove, I stopped the recording and saved the file. I watched the party reset itself, the murmuring tide of conversation rising to fill the silence. It was, I realized, a perfectly staged production. My family wasn't a family. It was a cast of actors in a long-running play about wealth they no longer possessed. Vivian, my mother, was the director. Her eyes were everywhere, checking glasses, guiding conversations, subtly pushing Tate Ellison toward the fireplace where the light was better. She was a master of aesthetics, ensuring the surface remained flawless. Even if the foundation was rotting, every smile was a cue, every touch a piece of blocking. Graham, my father, was the producer, the one with the grand vision and the empty pockets. Scrambling to fund his next vanity project, he was all charm and bluster, his laugh too loud, his hand resting on Tate's shoulder with a familiarity he hadn't earned. He was selling his last valuable asset, his daughter, to secure the next round of funding. His comment about clearing the debt echoed in my head, a drumbeat of desperation. And June, my sister, was the star. She was incandescent, draped in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was the commodity, the personal brand they had been investing in. Every laugh, every delicate sip of champagne was part of her performance. She was playing the role of a lifetime, the perfect, effortless prize. That left Tate Ellison. He was the investor, the angel investor, the whale, the mark. He was the one they were all performing for. He was tall, with that easy posture that comes from never having to worry about a single bill. But as I watched him, I saw something that didn't fit the narrative. He wasn't fawning over June. He was listening, his head tilted, but his eyes were roaming the room. He was polite, but he wasn't charmed. He looked less like a man in love and more like a man conducting due diligence. I slipped out of the alcove, my empty stomach churning from the single glass of champagne I'd accepted just to have something to hold. I needed air, or water, or anything that wasn't this suffocating performance. All the pieces were slotting into place. The years of no, when I asked for my own money, the sudden, extravagant spending, June's endless stream of new clothes, her branding trips to Miami and New York, the launch of her company, a vague LLC I'd seen on a piece of mail, June Day Media LLC. It sounded exactly like something June would invent, a company with no product, no service, just a logo and a bank account, an account. I was suddenly, sickeningly certain that was being funded by my account. I headed toward the kitchen, needing to get out of the main room. As I passed the short hallway that led to the mudroom, I heard a low, urgent voice. "Vivian, it has to stop. You cannot just take it." I froze. It was my aunt, Maura Quinn, my mother's sister. Maura was the black sheep, a librarian who lived in the city and wore sensible shoes. She was the only one who ever asked me about school and actually listened to the answer. "Keep your voice down," Vivian hissed. I could picture her perfectly head-angled, eyes narrowed. "It's not taking. It's an investment in the future, in June's future. It's for the family." "It's theft," Maura said, her voice shaking but firm. "It's Penelope's money. Vivian, what you are doing is illegal, and you know it. Calling it an investment doesn't change what it is. It's theft. Theft." The word was a tuning fork. It vibrated through my entire body. It was not borrowing. It was not reallocating. It was not an investment. It was theft, a civil tort, a potential crime. A door opened and closed. I heard my mother's heels click away. I stayed in the shadows, my heart pounding. Theft, the legal implications, the statutes, the burden of proof, all scrolled through my mind like a textbook index. I needed to be alone. I slipped out the side door onto the freezing bluestone terrace. The cold air burned my lungs, a welcome shock. I leaned against the stone wall, the music and laughter from inside a distant thrum. I pulled out my phone again. The battery was down to 38%. I ignored the audio file and opened my email. There it was. An email I'd received 2 days ago and had been too terrified to open. The subject line read, "Interview invitation. Halloway. Ridge Talbot, LLP." I had sent out over 100 resumes. Most went unanswered. The few replies I got were for document review jobs, paying $20 an hour. Jobs that didn't even require a bar certification. HRT was different. They were a boutique litigation firm, known for being aggressive, smart, and utterly ruthless. They didn't just fight, they won. The email was from a senior partner, Archer Talbot, inviting me to an interview for a new associate position. The specialty complex consumer fraud and class action lawsuits. I hadn't replied. Not because I didn't want it, I wanted it so badly it ached. I hadn't replied because I was ashamed. Because I was standing in a plasma clinic trying to make $85. Because my family had spent my entire life convincing me that I was the smart one, which was their code for the plain one, the difficult one, the one who wasn't worth investing in. I was terrified of walking into that polished office and having them see what my family saw: a girl from Fishtown in a second-hand dress, pretending to be a lawyer. That's theft, my aunt's voice. I looked at the email. Consumer fraud. This was a different kind of fraud, a family kind, but the principles were the same. Deception for financial gain, breach of fiduciary duty. My hand was shaking, but not from the cold. I went back inside, my path clearer. I needed one more thing. I needed to see the investor's face one more time. I found Tate Ellison near the bar, momentarily alone. As I approached, he turned. His eyes met mine, and for the first time all night, he didn't look bored. He looked analytical. He was observing me. "You're Penelope," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "You're the lawyer." My stomach tightened. "I just passed the bar." "Yes." "Congratulations," he said, and his voice was flat, neutral. It was the first time anyone had said it to me tonight. "That's a significant achievement." Before I could respond, June was there, looping her arm through his, her laughter bright and brittle from too much champagne. "Tate, darling, don't let her bore you with law talk," she trilled. "It's a party." She pulled him away, but not before he gave me one last, unreadable look. I stayed by the bar, the recorder on my phone now running again, this time in my hand, held loosely at my side. June was holding court with a small circle of her friends, Tate standing beside her, a polite smile fixed on his face. "He's gorgeous, June," one of her friends sighed. "But aren't you worried? I mean, your sister is a lawyer, all that thinking." June let out that high, tinkling laugh, the one that always set my teeth on edge. She tossed her perfect hair. "Oh, please," she said, her voice carrying across the room, loud and clear. "Men marry a face, not a JD." The group erupted in laughter. Even Tate's smile twitched. My phone, resting in my palm, captured it all. The laughter, the clinking glasses, and that one, perfect, devastating sentence. I pressed the stop button. I had the motive. I had the mindset. I had the legal term. I had everything I needed to begin. I didn't bother with a coat. I walked out of the brightly lit living room, past my mother who was motioning to a caterer about the champagne flutes, past my father who was already telling another grand story by the fire. I walked up the main staircase, my old heels silent on the thick Persian runner. I went straight down the hall to my father's study. The door was, as always, closed. I turned the brass knob and pushed it open. I closed the study door, the heavy oak, a symbol of my father's manufactured gravitas. Shut out the party noise instantly. The silence that replaced it was heavy, broken only by the electronic hum of the modem in the corner and the sound of my own measured breathing. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I used the flashlight on my phone, the beam cutting a sterile white cone across the room. It smelled of my father-old leather, stale pipe tobacco, and the faint, sweet acetone of expensive whiskey. His mahogany desk was a battlefield of desperation. Piles of unopened, red-stamped mail, glossy prospectuses for doomed ventures, and 3 half-empty coffee mugs. He was a man drowning in appearances. It wasn't hard to find. He treated family finances with the same chaotic disregard he treated his business. Tucked under a stack of golf magazines was a thick folder labeled simply Hartley Accounts. I opened it, and there it was, a statement from the bank, printed on heavy bond paper. Hartley Utma for Penelope. My account. I braced myself. The balance remaining $62,400. A hollow space opened in my chest. I knew, from a partial statement I'd glimpsed years ago before I was locked out. The balance should have been closer to $300,000. The numbers were not the worst part. The worst part was the transaction history. I traced the columns with a shaking finger. It was methodical. Transfer, 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 a steady bleed. And the recipient, over and over, week after week, June Day Media LLC. They weren't even trying to hide it. They were funneling my trust fund directly into my sister's vanity project. My hand stopped shaking. It became very, very still. This wasn't anger anymore. This was discovery. I laid the statement flat on the green leather blotter. I angled the phone, ensuring the light was even, eliminating all shadow. I took a clear, high-resolution photo. I opened a new, secure folder on my phone. I named the file Exhibit A. I dug deeper into the desk pile. The transfers were just the beginning. They had been spending directly from the account, and they were arrogant. They were sloppy. Receipts were scattered through the Hartley Accounts folder, mixed in with my father's business expenses as if they were all the same. A flimsy pink carbon copy from Maison La Mer, a handbag, the total $7,900. I photographed it. Exhibit B. A heavier, embossed invoice, thick as cardstock. The Orangery at Belfield. Subject Hartley/Ellison wedding venue. Deposit, $18,000. My money. My uniform transfers to Minors Act money, which was supposed to be for my welfare, my education. My start in life had paid the deposit for the wedding. The wedding my father, just an hour ago, had bragged would clear all the debt. I took the picture. Exhibit C. Then I found the part that made my blood run cold. Beneath the receipts was a single-page document, typed, looking disturbingly official. Hartley Internal Loan Agreement. It was their attempt at a legal defense, their alibi. It was an agreement loaning funds from the Hartley Utma for Penelope to June Day Media LLC. For the purposes of brand development, I scanned the signature lines at the bottom. My father, Graham Hartley, had signed as the borrower. CEO, June Day Media, my mother, Vivian Hartley, had signed as the lender. Beside her signature, she had handwritten Guardian. I let out a short, sharp, ugly laugh in the quiet room. Guardian. I was 29 years old. I had been a legal adult for 11 years. My mother had not been my guardian for over a decade. Her signature held no authority. The document was a fraudulent instrument. It was worthless. It lacked the one signature that mattered. The only one required mine, the beneficiary, and tucked inside the same folder, as if it belonged, was the final piece, a draft proposal, marked with my father's frantic highlighter. Proposal Ellison Foundation Strategic Partnership. I scanned it. It was bloated corporate language synergy, brand alignment, legacy activation. It was a naked, desperate plea for the Ellison family to invest in, or perhaps acquire, Graham's failing consulting business, all of it pending the unification of the two families. They weren't just using my money for a wedding. They were using my money as seed capital to buy a bailout. I sat down in my father's oversized leather chair. The cushion was still warm from his body. I pulled my phone out, the screen lighting up my face. My fingers flew. I opened my email. I found the invitation from Halloway. Ridge Talbot. I hit reply. My voice was gone. In its place was the voice of Penelope Green, Esquire. Dear Mr. Talbot, I typed. Thank you for the invitation. I am very interested in the associate position focused on consumer fraud. I am available to meet at your earliest convenience. This coming Monday morning would be ideal, if your schedule permits. I look forward to discussing my qualifications. Sincerely, Penelope Green. I hit send. The whoosh sound of the email leaving was the sound of a match being struck. While the adrenaline surged, I opened a new browser tab. I typed in Pennsylvania Utma Statute Beneficiary Welfare. It took less than 10 seconds. The law was clear. The custodian, my mother, was required to manage the account for the use and benefit of the beneficiary. Even after I reached the age of majority, her fiduciary duty was to my benefit. It was not for the benefit of June Day Media, LLC. It was not for a $7,000 handbag. It was not for my sister's wedding venue. This was not a gray area. This was not a family dispute. This was black and white. This was theft. A soft tap on the study door made me jump, and my heart slammed against my ribs. I killed the phone screen, plunging the room back into darkness, my body tensing. "Penelope," a voice whispered. It was Aunt Maura. I opened the door a crack. She stood in the hallway, her face pale, her hands twisting the strap of her sensible brown purse. The party noise washed in for a split second before I pulled her inside and shut the door again. "I saw you come up here," she said, her voice low and tight. I knew where you'd look." "You knew." "I tried to stop her," she said, her eyes, so different from my mother's, filling with an angry shame. "I told her. I told Vivian it was wrong, that it was illegal. She wouldn't listen. She said you owed them, for your education, for being difficult. She used my education to steal from me. Yes." Maura looked past me at the desk, at the scattered papers I hadn't had time to hide. Her face hardened. "She's always been like this. She thinks beauty is a currency. And you had the wrong kind. You had the kind she couldn't spend. You had the kind that scared her." A beat of silence passed between us, thick and final. "If you are going to do something, Penelope," Maura said, meeting my gaze directly, "if you're going to fight them, I want you to know, if you need a witness, I will stand with you." I looked at her, the librarian, the only person in this entire family who had ever seen me for who I was. "A witness to what?" "To the conversations," she said, her voice gaining strength. "To the years of them saying that account was for June's launch, to me warning Vivian, explicitly, that what she was doing was theft. I will testify, under oath." I nodded slowly. This wasn't a tearful family reunion. It was an alliance. I pulled out my phone. "Give me your number again," I said. She recited it. I deleted her old contact entry. "Aunt Maura?" I created a new one. I typed WITNESSONE, witness 1. "Go back to the party," I said, my voice low and steady. "Don't look worried. Don't say anything. Just be yourself. Be the quiet librarian." She squeezed my arm, a quick, hard gesture of solidarity, and slipped out of the room. I straightened the papers on the desk, but not perfectly. I left the Hartley accounts folder slightly askew. I wanted them to know someone had been there. I wanted them to be nervous. I wanted them to wonder who was coming for them. I walked down the main staircase, my head high. My phone was heavy in my coat pocket, weighted with audio files and exhibits. I passed the living room entryway. The party was louder now, fueled by champagne and my stolen money. June was laughing, her head thrown back. Tate was watching her, his expression still unreadable. My parents were orbiting them, triumphant, the producers of a hit show. I walked out the front door. No one saw me leave. The cold was sharp, a clean break. As I walked to my rusting car, a light, dry snow began to fall, the flakes dusting my shoulders, covering my tracks. The next 48 hours were a compressed lifetime. Monday morning, 9 a.m., I was sitting at my flimsy particle board desk in the Fishtown loft. The radiator was clanging, a futile protest against the cold seeping through the single-pane window. I was wearing my only interview-worthy blouse, paired with the blazer I'd bought at a thrift store for $10. From the waist down, I was wearing sweatpants and thick wool socks. I'd angled my laptop on a stack of textbooks so the camera avoided the peeling paint and the sad, wilting plant in the corner. Behind me was a blank, white wall, a neutral background I'd cleared just for this. The Zoom window opened. Archer Talbot, senior partner at Halloway, Ridge Talbot, materialized on my screen. He was not what I expected. He was in his late 40s, sharp, with restless eyes and a perfectly tailored suit. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a shark that had learned to walk. He wasn't in a corner office. He was in what looked like a minimalist war room, whiteboards covered in diagrams behind him. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Ms. Green, your resume is efficient, top 10% at Temple Law Review, but you took a year off before the bar. Why? I was working, I said, my voice perfectly steady. I had rehearsed this. I was financing my education and bar admission costs independently. I preferred to enter the profession with zero debt and full focus. I passed the Pennsylvania exam 3 weeks ago. Talbot nodded, as if ticking a box. Efficient. As I said, you have no practical litigation experience. You've been reviewing contracts for a delivery app. Why consumer fraud? Why us? I leaned forward, just slightly. Because contract review is about finding what's wrong before it happens. Consumer fraud is about finding what's wrong after it's been deliberately hidden. I'm good at reading the fine print. I'm good at finding the lie. Your firm doesn't just argue cases. You dismantle deceptive systems. That's what I want to do. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes boring into me through the screen. He seemed to be listening to something other than my words. This is not an easy place to work, Ms. Green, he said, his voice flat. We deal with high stakes, high pressure, multi-million-dollar class actions. Our opponents are corporate giants. They are well-funded. They are ruthless. And they play dirty. What makes you think you're resilient enough for that? This was the real question. He wasn't asking about my grades. He was asking if I could take a punch. I thought of the plasma clinic. I thought of my mother's voice. I thought of June's laugh. Mr. Talbot, I said, and my voice was no longer polished or rehearsed. It was cold. I have spent my entire life in a hostile environment, navigating complex rules designed to benefit everyone but me. I've had to fight for every resource I've ever gotten, usually against opponents who held all the power. I'm not resilient because I can take a punch. I'm resilient because I've already won. I'm just used to winning quietly. A flicker of something, not a smile, but an acknowledgement passed over his face. We'll be in touch. The screen went black. I sat there for a full minute, the silence of the loft roaring in my ears. The adrenaline drained away, leaving me exhausted. I had either just secured my future or blown the only real chance I'd ever had. For the rest of the day, I was a wreck. I refreshed my email every 30 seconds. I tried to review a gig work contract, but the words swam. I was back in the plasma clinic, back to the $85. The email arrived at 4:52 p.m. Subject offer of employment, Halloway. Ridge Talbot, LLP. I clicked it. My hands were numb. It was a formal PDF. I scrolled past the legal boilerplate to the numbers. Base salary, $170,000. I stopped breathing. Plus a signing bonus of $40,000. To be paid in full within 5 business days of your acceptance. I read the numbers again and again. $40,000. That was more than the balance of my student loans. It was more than I had made in the last 3 years combined. It was not just a job. It was an escape pod. It was a weapon. I printed the offer letter on my ancient, groaning printer. I read the hard copy, tangible in my hands. I signed it with a black pen. My signature clear and sharp. I scanned it. I attached it to a new email. Dear Mr. Talbot, I accept. I look forward to joining the team. I hit send. My phone rang almost immediately. It was not Archer Talbot. It was Vivian. Penelope, darling, she said, her voice like warm honey, the voice she used when she wanted something. Mom, I'm so glad I caught you. We missed you after the party. You slipped away so fast. Listen, we're having a small dinner on Saturday night. Just family. A little reconciliation dinner. We need to present a united front. A united front for who? A pause. A tiny crack in the honey. For Tate. Of course. He was a little confused by your behavior. He's hesitant. It's very important you come. We need to smooth this over. He's hesitant, I repeated, the offer letter still warm in my hand. About what? About marrying into a family that's funding the wedding with stolen money. The silence on the other end was absolute. When she spoke again, the honey was gone, replaced by pure, cold venom. "You will be here, Saturday at 7, if you sabotage your sister's future with this drama. You will regret it." She hung up. My phone buzzed again almost instantly. A text message. From June. "What did you say to Tate?" "He's asking questions. You're ruining everything." I looked at the text. I thought about men marry a face, not a JD. I typed my reply. I said nothing. Maybe he's smart. I blocked her number. I was on a roll. I blocked Vivian's number. My phone buzzed again. A text from Graham. "Penelope, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to stop. Don't let ambition tear this family apart. This is your sister's happiness." Ambition. I thought he had no idea. I blocked him, too. The loft suddenly felt suffocating. A cage I had just been given the key to. I opened my laptop. I didn't go to my contract review queue. I went to a real estate website. I typed in Society Hill. I looked at listings for clean, bright, secure apartments, places with hardwood floors and dishwashers and doormen, places where the heat worked. I found it. Saddle Court Lofts, a converted 19th century building, a one-bedroom with exposed brick and a new kitchen. The price was astronomical. 3 days ago, it was a fantasy. Today, it was a line item on my budget. I filled out the application. I attached my offer letter from HRT as proof of income. I paid the $500 deposit with my credit card, the one that was almost maxed out. I didn't care. The next day, I went to a copy shop. I spent $60. I printed every bank statement from the UTMA account I could access online. I printed the photos I had taken in my father's study. I printed the internal loan agreement. I printed the Ellison Foundation proposal. I went back to my loft, but it felt different. It was a temporary station. I spread every piece of paper across my floor. I took out a yellow highlighter and a red pen. I built my case. I created a timeline. Starting 3 years ago, every withdrawal, every transfer, I cross-referenced the dates. June 10th, $10,000 transfer to June Day Media LLC. June 12th, $7,900 charge at Maison La Mer. August 1st, $5,000 transfer to June Day Media LLC. August 2nd, $4,800 charge at Soho House, Miami. It was a meticulous, obscene map of their deception. My money, my $85 plasma clinic bill money, had paid for her influencer lifestyle. It had paid for my father's fantasy of solvency. It had paid for the party where I was treated like a servant. I highlighted every transfer. I circled every matching luxury purchase. I put Exhibit A through Exhibit C in clear plastic sleeves. I wrote a legal analysis of the loan agreement, citing the precise Pennsylvania statute it violated. I was no longer a daughter. I was counsel for the plaintiff. I worked until it was dark outside. The loft was cold again, but I didn't notice. I was energized, fueled by a pure, clean rage. I compiled everything into a single, terrifyingly organized binder. I shut my laptop. I was done for the day. I was about to stand up when my phone pinged with a new email. It wasn't from HRT. It wasn't from the new apartment building. The sender's address was a string of random letters from a private server. The subject line hit me first. It was only 4 words. Subject: "Don't sell your blood." I froze. My heart, which had been racing with anger, suddenly went still. I opened the email. The message was just as short. "EC wants to see you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The Plasma Clinic on Kensington. Come alone." I went back to the Plasma Clinic at 9:55 a.m. The place was just as I remembered, the same humming fluorescent lights, the same antiseptic smell, the same atmosphere of quiet desperation, but I was different. The HRT offer was a shield, the $40,000 signing bonus, which would hit my account in days, was a sword. I wasn't here for the $85. I was here because a ghost had summoned me to the place where I had died. I walked to the counter. The same tired woman slid a clipboard toward me. "Sign in. Take a seat." I did as I was told. I sat in the plastic chair. My new, organized binder heavy in the tote bag at my feet. I was playing a part. I was the girl from the other day, the girl who needed to sell her blood to pay her electric bill. I clicked the cheap ballpoint pen and bent over the form. I was writing my name, Penelope Green, when a shadow fell over the page. A hand, large and wrinkled, but unmistakably powerful, landed on the clipboard and pulled it from my lap. The gesture was not rough, but it was absolute. "You will not sign another thing to sell your own blood," a low voice said. I looked up. The man from the hook. He was tall, even slightly stooped with age. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored wool coat that probably cost more than my entire law school tuition. His hair was thick and white, brushed back from a high forehead, but his eyes were the things that held me. They were a cold, pale, steel gray. They were eyes that assessed, acquired, and owned. They were nothing like my father's weak, hopeful eyes. They were nothing like my mother's calculating, aesthetic ones. These were eyes that built things and destroyed them. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt as though I were being valued, down to the cent. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice flat, betraying nothing. "My name is Eamon Caldwell," he said. The name hit me like a physical blow. Caldwell, the name my mother had shed like a snakeskin, the name of the mythical, disowned father, the dirty money ghost. "My grandfather," I stated. It was not a question. "I am," he said. He tucked the clipboard under his arm as if he owned it, as if he owned the entire clinic. "And you, Penelope, are my granddaughter. Now, come with me. This place is a disgrace." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out. I grabbed my bag. A million legal questions firing in my mind, undue influence, coercion, standing, and followed him. The woman behind the counter just watched, her mouth slightly open. He didn't have a limousine waiting. He just crossed Kensington Avenue, his long strides forcing me to almost jog to keep up. He walked into the greasy diner on the opposite corner, a place with cracked vinyl booths and a buzzing neon open sign. We slid into a booth by the window. He set the plasma clinic clipboard on the table between us like a trophy. A waitress came over, her eyes wide at his coat. "Just coffee," he said. "Black. The same," I said. We sat in silence until the thick, burnt-smelling coffee arrived. He didn't touch his. He just watched me. "You look like my mother," he said. "Not like Vivian. Like my mother. You have her eyes. Vivian got her weakness from her father's side." "My family," I said, my voice like ice, "claims you are long dead to us." "They're half right," he said. "I am dead to them. They are not dead to me. I've been watching." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It wasn't in a wallet. It was just there, carried like a permit. He slid it across the table. I picked it up. It was a little girl, maybe 3 years old, with my unruly dark hair. She was perched on the shoulders of a younger man, his face turned up toward her, laughing. In the background, I could see the steel girders of the old Spring Garden Street Bridge. It was me, and it was him. I had never seen this photograph before in my life, in my house. My childhood photos started at age 4. There were no pictures of me as a baby, no pictures of me as a toddler. It was as if I hadn't existed before my sister June was born. "She burned them," he said, as if reading my mind. "When she cut me off, she tried to erase me. She tried to erase you." I slid the photo back. "Why are you here, Mr. Caldwell?" "Eamon," he corrected. "Or grandfather. I don't care. I'm here because I saw you. Penelope, I saw you 2 weeks ago, walking out of this very diner. I saw you look at that clinic. I saw you calculate the risk versus the reward. And then I saw you go in. It was a disgrace. I made some calls. I found out who you were. I found out what they were doing to you." "You sent the email," I said. "EC? Don't sell your blood." "I did. It was a test." To see if you would come, to see if you were hungry, or if you were smart. You're both. What do you want?" He leaned forward, and the faint smell of expensive cologne and cold air came with him. "My daughter, Vivian. She hates the name Caldwell. She hates the work. She wanted to be a Hartley. She wanted the thin-blooded, useless pedigree of the main line, but she never, not for 1 second, stopped wanting Caldwell money." He reached into his coat again. This time, he pulled out a slim leather-bound notebook. It was a transaction ledger. He opened it. "I funded them, Penelope, for 20 years. I paid for that ridiculous house in Wynwood. I paid for their club memberships. I paid for Graham's string of pathetic, failed consulting businesses. I paid for June's private school. I paid for your mother's entire life. All of it funneled quietly through a trust so she could pretend she was doing it on her own." His finger stopped on a line item. And then, here. 13 years ago, the payments stop. Why? Because she sent the check back. She wrote me a letter. "We don't need your dirty industrial money anymore. We have our own resources now." My blood went cold. 13 years ago, I whispered. "I turned 16. "Exactly," Eamon said, his steel-gray eyes sharp. "The year she gained full custodial control of your UTMA, the account I set up for you. She found a new bank, a bank she could control, a bank that didn't ask questions. She cut me off because she had found you." The pieces slammed together. My entire life, my entire childhood of being the difficult one, the expensive one, was a lie. My education, which my mother held over me as my great debt, had been paid for twice, once by him, and once with my own stolen money. "She is," I said, my voice thick, "a thief." "She is," he agreed, with no emotion at all. "Which brings us to now. I have the resources, granddaughter. To end this, I can have her in court by Monday. I can have your father investigated for tax fraud. I can ruin them. I can make noise." He paused, watching me. "Or we can get justice. Which do you want?" I thought of the HRT offer. I thought of the binder in my bag. I thought of Archer Talbot's shark-like eyes. Noise was messy. Noise was emotional. Noise was what my mother understood. Justice was what I understood. "I don't want noise," I said. "I want my money. I want evidence. And I want a deadline." A slow, cold smile spread across Eamon Caldwell's face. It was the first time he had smiled. It was terrifying. "Good," he said. "You are my granddaughter. Noise is for them. Justice is for us. Here is what we do." He laid it out. "The bank that holds your UTEMA, Hartley Gerard Trust, it's an old, sleepy mainline bank. I've known the CEO for 30 years. I made a call this morning, after I knew you'd read my email. They are receptive to my concerns." "You can't freeze the account," I said, the law clicking in. "She's the custodian, legally. She has control until I move to have her removed." "You're right," he said, and he looked proud. "I can't freeze it, but I can flag it. Caldwell Trust, my bank, is preparing to acquire a significant portion of Hartley Gerard's debt. As a primary creditor, I have requested a soft freeze on all major fiduciary accounts pending an audit. Any withdrawal over $500 from your UTEMA, as of this morning, requires a secondary manual review, a review that comes across my desk. She is a custodian, but she is a custodian of a cage I just built. He had financially neutered them in a single morning. So now what? I asked. Now, you go to your dinner party, you have your offer from Halloway. Ridge Talbot, that's your shield. You have that binder in your bag. That's your sword. And I am your launch pad. I am the invisible threat they don't know exists. This is your fight. Penelope, I will not step in. I will not save you. You will do that yourself, but I will be the backstop. I will be the bank. I will be the reason their threats are hollow. He stood up, pulling a few bills from his pocket and dropping them on the table. It was more than enough for the coffee. He picked up the plasma clinic clipboard. "I'm keeping this," he said. "A souvenir, to remind me what a disgrace looks like." He started to walk away. "Mr. Caldwell?" I called out. He stopped, but didn't turn. "Thank you." He looked back at me, his face unreadable. "Don't thank me. Go to that dinner, and do not warn them. Do not give them time to hide the assets or create new lies. My daughter and her husband, they are weak. They only understand consequences. Make them choose their consequence." He walked out of the diner. I sat there for a long time. Then I picked up the photograph, the little girl on his shoulders, laughing in the sun, without a care in the world. I slipped it into my binder, right behind Exhibit C. I was no longer counsel for the plaintiff. I was the executioner. I walked into the Wynwood house at 7 o'clock on the dot. I was not the same person who had left a week ago. I was wearing the thrift store blazer, the black dress, and my old boots. But I felt like I was wearing armor, in my tote bag. Resting against my hip was the binder. The dining room was set for a state dinner, not a small family reconciliation. It was a stage, just as I'd expected. The long mahogany table was covered in a blindingly white linen cloth. Rows of heavy antique silver gleamed under the light of the crystal chandelier. My mother had outdone herself with the centerpiece, an absurdly large arrangement of calla lilies and, bizarrely, licorice root, which gave the air a faint, sickly sweet smell. It was all perfect, sterile, and cold. They were all there. My mother, Vivian, at the head of the table, smiling. The director in her element. My father, Graham, at the foot, pouring a red wine that was far too expensive for his budget. My sister, June, sat in the middle, looking radiant, but with a tightness around her eyes. And Tate Ellison, he was seated to Vivian's right, the guest of honor, the investor. He watched me as I entered, his expression neutral, impossible to read. The final player was Aunt Maura. She was seated at the far end, near my father. Almost an afterthought. She looked small and nervous, her hands clasped tightly around the brown purse in her lap. I knew what was in that purse. Her notary seal. My witness one. "Penelope, darling," Vivian cooed, gesturing to the empty seat opposite June. "You're just in time. We were so worried you wouldn't make it." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. I sat down. The chair was hard and straight-backed. I placed my tote bag on the floor beside me. For a few minutes, the performance was flawless. My father talked about the wine. My mother complimented June's dress. June asked Tate about a polo match. It was all smooth, polished surface. I said nothing. I just waited. The silence of my presence was a stone dropped into a still pond, and the ripples were spreading. Vivian finally placed her fork down with a delicate click. She dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. Phase 1 of the operation was beginning. "Penelope," she said, her voice dripping with maternal concern. "I am so glad we're all here. We need to talk about this unpleasantness, this aggression. You're a smart girl. You have a brand new law certification. You must know how small Philadelphia is." She smiled, a thin, tight gesture. "It's a city of old families and long memories. A young lawyer's career can be permanently stalled, a reputation for being difficult, for being uncooperative. It can be devastating. You could be blacklisted before you even begin, all because of some childish, stubborn insistence." It was a beautiful threat, vague, powerful, and delivered with a smile. My father cleared his throat, picking up his cue. Phase 2, the reasonable solution. "Your mother is right, Penny," he said, using the childhood name I despised. "There's no need for any of this. No need for hostility. We have a solution, an elegant solution." He leaned forward, trying to look paternal and magnanimous. "It's simple. You apologize to June for this, whatever this is, for upsetting her and Tate. You agree to let this whole Utma misunderstanding go. It's family money, after all. And in return," he beamed, "I've made a call. My old friend at Meridian Row, He's looking for a new junior associate. A good firm. A safe firm. I can get you an interview. We can make this right. We can put you on the proper path." So that was the trade. My silence, my inheritance. In exchange for a job referral, a job at a firm he could control, a firm that would report back to him. I looked across the table. June was watching me, her expression a mix of entitlement and anxiety. She truly believed this was a fair deal. And then there was Tate. He hadn't said a word. He was leaning back in his chair, his wineglass untouched. He was just watching. He was watching me. Then my mother, then my father. His fingers were tapping a silent, rhythmic beat on the stem of his glass. Tap, tap, tap. He was calculating. He was assessing his risk. I looked at Aunt Maura. She met my gaze for half a second, then looked down at her lap, her hand tightening on her purse. I took a slow, deep breath. The smell of lilies and licorice was nauseating. "I see," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. I reached down into my tote bag. I pulled out the binder. It was an inch thick, black, and severe. I placed it on the white linen tablecloth with a solid, definitive thud. The sound was louder than a gunshot in that room. Everyone flinched, except Tate. His tapping stopped. He just watched the binder. "Penelope, what is that?" Vivian demanded, her mask of concern slipping. "This," I said, "is my response to the elegant solution." I opened the cover. "I'd like to apologize," I said, my voice clear and cold. Every eye was on me. I'd like to apologize for being under the absurd impression that this family understood the most basic principles of law." "Now you listen here," Graham started, his face already turning red. I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I'm referring specifically to the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act of Pennsylvania. The law is quite clear. A custodian of an UTMA account that would be you. Mom has a fiduciary duty to manage the funds for the use and benefit of the minor beneficiary. That would be me." I turned a page. The statute does not define use and benefit as a $7,000 handbag from Maison La Mer. It does not define it as an $18,000 deposit for my sister's wedding venue. And it most certainly does not define it as systematic, multi-year transfers to a shell corporation, June Day Media LLC, for brand development. Vivian's face was white. "How dare you? That was a strategic investment." "A strategic investment," I echoed, letting a sharp, humorless laugh escape. "A strategic investment in the family brand. That's a very creative term for embezzlement. You breached your fiduciary duty. You misappropriated funds. You didn't invest my money. You stole it." "You ungrateful!" Graham roared, starting to rise from his chair. "Sit down," I said. My voice didn't rise. It just went flat. "Sit down." He froze, shocked by the command. He sat. "You call me ungrateful," I said, looking right at him. "You, who was going to clear all the debt with this wedding, you, who was using my money to fund the bait to catch your investor." I nodded my head toward Tate. Tate's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. He looked from me to Graham, and a glimmer of understanding and distaste entered his face. "This is slander," Vivian hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "They are ugly, ridiculous accusations." "They're not accusations," I said. "They're facts, and I have the receipts, all of them, in this binder." June, who had been silent, finally found her voice. It was shaking. "You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. You're trying to ruin my life because you don't have one." "Jealousy," I said, nodding slowly. "You're probably right. June, I am jealous. I'm jealous that you got to live a life of luxury, all on my dime. But you're wrong about me trying to ruin your life. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. In fact, you were doing it just last week." I reached into my blazer pocket. I pulled out my phone. "What are you doing?" June asked, her voice suddenly small. "I was at your engagement party. June, you remember? I was the one you told to go get the ice, but I was also in the alcove. And you You were so happy, so proud. You were holding court. I tapped the screen. I found the audio file. I pressed play. I turned the volume all the way up. June's voice, bright and brittle and full of champagne, filled the silent dining room. "Oh, please, men marry a face, not a JD." The following laughter of her friends was obscene in the silence. I stopped the recording. Every drop of color drained from June's face. She looked like she had been struck. My mother looked at her in horror. Not at the sentiment, but at the stupidity of saying it aloud. My father just looked confused. But Tate Ellison turned, very slowly, in his chair. He turned away from me, away from my parents, and looked directly at his fiancée. His voice was quiet. It was calm. It was absolutely terrifying. "Where?" he asked. "Did you say that, June?" The table was utterly, completely silent. The only sound was the faint, lingering hum of June's voice, hanging in the air like the smell of rotten flowers. June's mouth opened and closed. She was a fish, drowning in the sudden, dry silence of the room. She looked at Tate, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. "Tate, she stammered, her voice a thin whisper. "It was a joke. It was just a stupid, champagne joke." Tate didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed on me. "That was thorough," he said, his voice flat. "That was Exhibit C," I said, my voice like ice. I turned the page in the binder. The dry slide of the paper was the only sound. "Which brings me to Exhibit D." I pulled a single sheet of paper from its plastic sleeve, the Hartley Internal Loan Agreement. I slid it across the table. It stopped directly in front of my father. "This is your alibi," I said. "It's the flimsy legal defense you created, just in case I ever looked." Graham snatched the paper, his face a mottled red. "This is a valid, internal family arrangement. It's a loan. It's perfectly legal." "It's a fraudulent instrument," I said, my voice rising just enough to command the room. "And it's void." Vivian jumped in, her voice sharp. "I signed it, as your guardian." "You haven't been my guardian for 11 years. Mother, I was 27 years old when you signed this document, a legal adult, a beneficiary of sound mind, and a member of the Pennsylvania Bar. My signature, the beneficiary's signature, is required. It's not there." I tapped the empty line at the bottom of the page. "You signed as custodian, authorizing a loan from my account, and you, Dad, signed as the recipient for your non-existent company. That's not a loan. That's a conspiracy. There is no interest rate, there is no repayment schedule, and there is no schedule of benefits for me." I turned my head. In fact, the statute is very clear on this. Aunt Mora. Every head swiveled to the end of the table. Mora. My witness one looked terrified, but her hand was steady as she reached into her brown purse. She pulled out a small, folded piece of paper and her notary stamp, which she placed on the table with a quiet click. She began to read, her voice shaking at first, then gaining a librarian's firm authority. "Pennsylvania UTAMA Statute, Title 20, Section 5312. A custodian shall observe the standard of care that would be observed by a prudent person dealing with property of another." She took a breath. "A custodian may make a distribution by payment for the use and benefit of the minor." I picked up where she left off. "The statute does not say for the use and benefit of the minor's sister. It does not say for the purchase of luxury handbags, and it does not say for a wedding deposit. The moment I turned 21, your duty, Mother, was to transfer the property to me, not to drain it." Mora put the paper down. "Vivian," she said, her voice low, "I have my stamp, I have my ledger. If Penelope needs an affidavit, a sworn statement, detailing every conversation where I warned you that this was illegal, that this was theft, I am prepared to sign and notarize it, right here, right now." Vivian stared at her sister. The look on her face was not anger. It was pure, unadulterated betrayal. "You," she hissed. You are doing this in my home, you spinster. It's her home, too, I snapped. This is garbage, Graham roared, slamming his flat hand on the table, making the silver jump. This is all just paper and talk. You can't do a thing. Penelope, your money is at Hartley Gerard, our bank. We have been with them for 30 years. We have friends there. We will handle this internally. You mean you'll call your friends? I said. And try to hide what's left. I'm afraid you're too late. As of 10 a.m. this morning, the Hartley UTMA for Penelope account has been flagged. It's not frozen. I'm not that generous. But it is under strict transactional oversight. You're bluffing, Graham scoffed, but his eyes were darting nervously. Am I any withdrawal over $500 now requires a secondary manual review. A review by the bank's primary creditor. I paused, letting the silence build. A bank called Caldwell Trust. I watched my mother. It was exactly as Eamon had predicted. Her face did not just go pale. It crumpled. The name was a physical blow. The color, the composure, the directorship, it all evaporated in 1 second. Caldwell, she whispered, her voice cracking, all the cultured polish gone. Him, my father. He has no right. He has no authority over my family. He has no authority over your family, I said, leaning forward, my voice low and sharp. But Mr. Eamon Caldwell, my grandfather, has a great deal of authority over his bank, and his bank, Caldwell Trust, is currently in the process of acquiring a controlling interest in Hartley Gerard. He's not just a creditor, Dad, he's the new owner, your friends at the bank. As of this morning, they report to him. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a dynasty ending. Graham looked like he couldn't breathe. Vivian looked like she had seen a ghost. I stood up. The scraping of my chair against the hardwood floor was a violent, final sound. I felt taller than I had ever been in my life. So here are the terms, I announced. This is not a negotiation. This is a demand. Demand 1. The sum of $37,600, representing the most recent, egregious thefts for the wedding and June's brand trips, will be returned to my UTMA. You have 7 days. That's impossible, Graham sputtered. We don't have that. 7 days, I repeated. Demand 2 June. I turned to my sister, who looked small and lost. You will sign a legally binding covenant, which I have already drafted. It states that you will never again attempt to access, use, or leverage the UTAME account or any of my assets as collateral for any loan, personal or professional. Aunt Maura will notarize it. Tonight. Graham tried one last time. He found a final reserve of false bravado. He stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. You can't just dictate to us. We still have influence. We still have friends. This isn't over. As if on cue, the front doorbell rang. The sharp, sudden ding-dong echoed through the house. Everyone froze. We heard the muted footsteps of the caterer, who was still cleaning in the kitchen, walking down the hall. A brief, muffled exchange of voices. A moment later, the caterer appeared at the dining room entrance. He looked pale and profoundly uncomfortable. Mrs. Hartley, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a courier. For you. He says it's urgent. Vivian just stared at him, uncomprehending. A man in a crisp blue uniform stepped past the caterer. He was holding a stiff silver envelope and a digital signature pad. Vivian Hartley. My mother nodded. A jerky, puppet-like motion. Sign here, please. She took the stylus, her hand shaking so badly she could barely write her name. He handed her the envelope, nodded curtly, and left. Vivian was left standing there, holding the envelope. On the front, in sharp, black embossing, was a logo I now recognized. Caldwell Trust. Below it, 2 words. Official notice of transactional oversight. Her hands trembled. The envelope slipped from her grasp, fluttering down to the white tablecloth like a dead leaf. Tate Ellison finally moved. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and walked around the table. He didn't look at Vivian. He didn't look at June. He walked over to me. He pointed at the black binder I was still holding. "May I?" he asked. His voice was quiet, analytical. I nodded. "Be my guest." He opened the binder. He didn't look at the loan agreement. He didn't look at the photos. He went straight to Exhibit A, the bank statements. He scanned the columns, his eyes moving with the quick, practiced efficiency of someone who reads financial reports for a living. He traced the transfers. June Day Media, LLC. June Day Media, LLC. He saw the dates. He saw the amounts. He saw the final, remaining balance. $62,400. He closed the binder and placed it gently back on the table. He looked at Graham. His face was cold. "You told me her company was self-funding," he said. "You told me she had early private investors." It is," Graham stammered, his bluff gone. "This is just family seed money, a show of support." "It's theft," Tate said. The word was flat, final. His trust, his investment, was gone. June, seeing the look on Tate's face, finally and completely broke. The star, the product, the face, dissolved. It wasn't a pretty cinematic cry. It was a raw, ugly, gulping sob of pure panic. "It's not my fault," she shrieked, and she pointed a trembling finger directly at my mother. "It's not my fault. You told me to do it. You said it was my money." 2. You said it was for the family brand. You set up the account. You told me what to buy. The crack was no longer a crack. It was a chasm. The director had just been publicly betrayed by her star, in front of the investor, and the play was officially, spectacularly, over. June's accusation hung in the dead air. "You told me to do it." My mother, Vivian, stared at her. The director, the puppet master, had just watched her star performer cut her own strings and collapse in a heap. For a second, Vivian's face was blank with shock. Then, the shock was replaced by a deep, cold fury. She had lost her investor. She had lost her leverage. She had lost control. She turned that rage on me, but she needed a weapon. She had none left. So she looked, in desperation, back to the man who was still standing. "Tate," she said, her voice regaining a brittle, desperate strength. She was trying to reforge the alliance, to make me the common enemy. "Tate, you see what she is. You see what she's doing. She's tearing this family apart. Over a trifle. Over money." She stood, regaining some of her queenly posture, and pointed a shaking finger at me. "She's vindictive, and she's nothing. Tate, your father, he sits on the Ellison board. He is one of the most powerful men in this city. One phone call, that's all it would take. One call from him, and this ungrateful, malicious girl. She will never practice law in Philadelphia. She will be disbarred before she even begins. She will be finished." She held her breath, staring at him. It was her final, nuclear option, the threat of total annihilation. Tate looked at her. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. "Vivian," he said, and his voice was perfectly calm, almost gentle. "My father resigned his seat on the Ellison board 2 years ago. He lives in Palm Beach. He plays golf. He doesn't make calls." The sound Vivian made was a small, high-pitched gasp, the sound of a balloon deflating, the sound of her last bullet, her biggest gun, turning out to be a child's toy. Her threat, the foundation of her social power, was a 2-year-old illusion. She hadn't even done the basic research on the man she was trying to sell her daughter to. "He's right, Mother," I said, stepping into the void. "Your research is out of date, and so is your threat, and so," I looked at my father, "is your bribe." Graham looked up, confused. "What bribe?" "Your offer," I said. "Your elegant solution. A job at Meridian Row, a safe firm, a place where you could muzzle me, where you could call your old friend and get reports on me. That's your Exhibit D. A pathetic attempt to buy my silence. I reached into my tote bag. I pulled out a single, crisp, folded letter. The letterhead was thick, embossed, and sharp. "This," I said, "is Exhibit E." I tossed it onto the white tablecloth. It landed with a soft thwap next to the silver Caldwell Trust envelope. "It's my offer of employment. I start Monday, at Halloway. Ridge Talbot." Graham's face went white. "HRT Penelope. That's not a firm. That's a Shark Tank." "I know," I said. "I'm a shark. And firms like Halloway. Ridge Talbot don't get blacklisted by has-beens like you. They do the blacklisting. Your one phone call, even if it wasn't a pathetic fantasy, is meaningless. My career is secure." I tapped the letter. "My signing bonus is $40,000. My starting salary is $170,000. I am not the one in this room who is finished." The numbers hung in the air, obscene and beautiful. My father, who was leveraged to his eyeballs, who was trying to sell his daughter to clear his debts, looked like I had physically struck him. "And now," I said, my voice dropping, "we come to the last page, the part that isn't just a civil suit, the part that's criminal." I turned the final page in the binder, Exhibit F. It was simple, a side-by-side comparison. On the left, my mother's flowing signature from a birthday card. On the right, the spiky, anxious, fraudulent handwriting, Vivian Hartley, Guardian. "You signed this," I said, pointing to the illegal loan agreement, "authorizing the transfer of funds when I was 27 years old. You haven't been my guardian for 11 years. Aunt Maura," I nodded to her, "is prepared to testify, under oath, that she warned you specifically that you had no legal authority, that I was an adult. That means this isn't just a breach of fiduciary duty. This isn't just misappropriation. This is forgery. This is wire fraud. This is prison time." Graham slumped in his chair, his face gray. He looked at his wife as if he had never seen her before. "Vivian, what did you do?" "I did it for us," she shrieked, her voice finally shredding, the veneer of the cultured matriarch dissolving into raw, panicked greed. "I did it for June. Before I could deliver the final demand, before I could lay out the terms of her surrender." A new sound cut through the room, the slow, heavy creak of the dining room door opening. It swung inward, and he was there, Eamon Caldwell. He stood in the entryway of the house he had paid for. A living ghost returned to haunt the set. He wore his dark wool coat, his white hair gleaming under the chandelier. He took in the entire scene in one, sweeping, silent glance. Vivian, shattered. Graham, broken. June, a weeping ruin. Tate, a statue of ice. And me, at the head of the table, my binder of evidence open before me. In his left hand, he was holding the cheap, laminated clipboard from the Kensington Avenue Plasma Clinic. He walked into the room. His footsteps were the only sound, heavy and measured on the polished floor. He walked past his daughter as if she were a piece of furniture. He stopped beside me, at the head of the table. He held up the clipboard, the intake form I had started to sign still attached. "A souvenir," he said to me, his voice low, but it carried through the entire room. "To remind us what the $85 option looks like." He turned his cold, gray eyes on his daughter. "Vivian," my mother flinched, as if he had struck her. "You cut me off," Eamon said. His voice was conversational, as if discussing the wine. 13 years ago, you sent my check back. You were very proud. You had found your own resource." He nodded. "Just once. At me. You also included a letter. I kept it." He reached into his coat pocket, the same pocket that had held my photograph. He pulled out a single, faded piece of heavy, monogrammed stationery, Vivian's stationery. He held it up and read, "We appreciate your concern, Father, but we are fine. June's prospects are very bright. As for the older girl, she doesn't need money. She has books." He folded the letter neatly and tucked it back into his pocket. "She has books," he repeated, looking at me. "You were right. Vivian, she does. She's read all of them. Especially. His gaze turned hard. The law books. That was what broke her. Not the binder, not the notary, not the loss of Tate. It was this, the letter, the clipboard, the presence of the father she had tried to erase, standing in judgment, allied with the daughter she had tried to defraud. Vivian Hartley threw her head back, and a sound came out of her. A sound that was not a cry or a scream, but a high, terrible wail of loss. "You don't understand," she shrieked, her face contorted, ugly with a truth she had held in for 30 years. I had to, she pointed a shaking jeweled finger at me. Was a bad investment. She was difficult. She was plain. She was always just books. She turned, gesturing wildly at June, who was crying into her ruined makeup. But she's beautiful. Don't you see? She's beautiful. Investing in a face pays off faster. An investment in beauty is always safer. I did what I had to do. The confession, the ugly, rotten, foundational truth of the entire family. It was finally out, laid bare on the white linen tablecloth. More shocking than any bank statement. Investing in a face pays off faster. I looked at Tate. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He had just heard his entire engagement, his merger, his future, reduced to a desperate, fraudulent investment in a face. The product was a lie. The funding was stolen. The director was insane. He didn't say a word. He stepped forward. He reached down and, with a firm, decisive motion, pulled June's chair back from the table. For one wild second, I thought he was going to comfort her. He was not. He took her by the elbow, his grip like a vice, and pulled her to her feet. "The engagement is off," he said. Not to her, but to the room. "We are leaving." He didn't wait for a reply. He pulled June, stumbling and sobbing, out of the dining room. We heard their footsteps in the hall, the front door opening, and then the definitive, final slam of it closing. The investor had fled the stage. The room was destroyed. Graham was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, a broken man. Vivian was staring at the empty doorway, her mouth open, her ugly confession still echoing in the silence. Aunt Maura was quietly putting her notary stamp back in her sensible brown purse. It was over. Eamon Caldwell placed the plasma clinic clipboard on the table. He set it down right on top of my binder, as if closing a case. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. The emotion was gone, replaced by business. "Well done, granddaughter," he said quietly. "Now, how do you want to end this settlement or court?" "Settlement," I said. The word dropped into the ruined, silent room. Eamon Caldwell's question still hung in the air. Settlement or court, Graham was a collapsed suit, his head in his hands. Vivian was staring at the doorway where Tate had vanished, her face a mask of disbelief. Court would be loud, public, and bloody. It would be a spectacle, but I wasn't my mother. I didn't need an audience. "I want it quiet," I said. "But I want it total, a settlement, with signatures. Tonight." Eamon nodded once, a brief, satisfied gesture. "A clean kill is the best kill." Before I could even move, the dining room door, which Tate had left open, was filled again. He was back, but he was alone. June was not with him. He had, I assumed, deposited her somewhere upstairs. In a car, it didn't matter. He was here, his coat on, his face grim. He ignored my parents. He looked only at me. "A word, Ms. Green," he said. It was not a request. I followed him into the grand, cold foyer. The air was thick with the ghosts of the party. "She is elsewhere," he said, preempting my question. "I am leaving, but I wanted to inform you of 2 things. First," he pulled out his phone, his thumb already moving. "I have engaged an independent auditor, Kroll. They will be conducting a full review of my potential exposure to this family. If your numbers are wrong, if this fraud runs deeper, I will find it." "The numbers are not wrong," I said. "We'll see," he said. "Second, the wedding is, naturally, postponed, indefinitely, Pending the outcome of that audit and other considerations, he was assessing me again, the way he had at the party, the investor, checking a new asset. His eyes were calculating if I was a threat, an ally, or just a new player. He was wondering, I was sure, if I was the other Hartley girl he could do business with. I cut him off. I am not interested in your wedding. Mr. Ellison, I am not trying to replace my sister. I am not competing for a prize. I am here to get my money back. That is all. For the first time, a flicker of genuine respect, not calculation, crossed his face. He seemed almost relieved. I see that, he said. He gave a sharp, single nod. Good luck. He turned, walked out the front door, and did not look back. This time, the definitive, final slam of the heavy door echoed through the entire house. I walked back into the dining room. My parents and Aunt Maura had watched the entire exchange. They had seen the last rat, the money rat, flee the ship, but only after a private, respectful conference with me. I sat down at the head of the table. I felt the power in the room consolidate, moving from my mother, past my father, and settling, heavy as a crown, on me. Settlement, I said again. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out several copies of a document I had drafted 2 days ago. I'd been hoping to use it. I've already prepared the confession of judgment and repayment agreement. I slid the first copy to Graham. It's simple. You will repay the initial amount of $37,600. This is non-negotiable. 37? Graham choked, his voice hoarse. Penelope, that's impossible. We don't have that kind of liquidity. You have 7 days, I said. 7, and you will pay interest. I've set it at the current prime rate plus 1%, compounding daily. It's a better rate than you'd get from a loan shark, which is what you've been. I slid another copy to Vivian. And there's a penalty clause. Should you fail to transfer the full amount by 5 p.m. on the 7th day, if you are $1 short or 1 minute late, this agreement becomes void, and I retain the right to transfer the entire case, including the original bank statements and Exhibit F. I tapped the forgery analysis to the senior partners at Halloway, Ridge Talbot. I will, of course, fully disclose my conflict of interest. They are, as you know, the top consumer fraud and class action firm in the state. They would enjoy this very much. You can't, Graham said, his voice rising in panic. That's a conflict. You work for them. Which is why this agreement, I said, pointing to the last page, contains a waiver, which you will sign, acknowledging that I have disclosed my employment and that you waive any and all objections to HRT representing me. You are trapped. Dad, you will pay, or you will be professionally, publicly, and financially annihilated. Your choice. A noise from the doorway. June. She had crept back down the stairs, her face scrubbed raw and blotchy, her expensive dress ruined. She looked 12 years old. Tate's final departure had broken her. Good, I said, not unkindly. You're just in time. I slid a packet toward her. This is for you. It's an appendix to the main agreement. Exhibit G, a personal covenant. What is it? She whispered, her voice ruined from crying. It's a promise, I said. It states that you will write me a formal written letter of apology. It also states that you will personally, from your own money, not the family's, not the UTMA, repay the $7,000 handbag and the $4,800 Miami trip. If you ever make a single dollar from your lifestyle brand, it comes to me first. You will work to pay me back. You will learn what earning something means. She looked at Vivian, her eyes pleading for a rescue that was never coming. Vivian just stared at the calla lilies, her face a mask of stone. June picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly that her signature was a spidery, illegible crawl. But it was on the line. I pushed the main agreement to my father. He read the penalty clause. He read the waiver. His eyes, when he looked up, were red-rimmed and defeated. I was just, he stammered, the tears finally coming. I was just so in debt. To the expectations, to this house, to her. He gestured, weakly, at Vivian. It was the first honest thing he had said to me in my entire life. He signed the paper. I pushed the last copy to my mother. She sat bolt upright, a queen on a collapsing throne. "This is undignified," she whispered, her voice shaking with a terrible, cold rage. "To be humiliated, in my own home, by my own blood." Eamon, who had been standing by the wall, silent as a statue, finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through her words like a razor. "Dignity," he said, "doesn't pay bills. Vivian, sign the paper." Her hand, not trembling with fear, but with pure, white-hot fury, snatched the pen. She didn't sign her name. She stabbed the paper with it, a violent, angry slash of black ink. It was done. I collected the signed pages. I straightened them. I looked at the end of the table. Aunt Mora, my witness one, stood up. This was her moment. She walked to my side. She pulled her notary ledger and her heavy metal embosser from her sensible brown purse. She had them sign her book, one by one. Graham, Vivian, June. Then she took my copy of the agreement. She placed it on the table. She lifted the seal. She pressed down. Clack. The sound of the metal die biting into the paper was loud, sharp, and final. She pressed again for the appendix. Clack. It was the sound of a lock engaging, the sound of a vault closing. It was the sound of a lid being hammered onto the coffin of a long, toxic, terrible family habit. I took the notarized pages and slid them, carefully, into my binder. I closed the cover. Eamon Caldwell, his work finished, straightened his wool coat. He had never sat down. He had never accepted a drink. He had been a ghost, a judge, and a backstop. He walked to the door. He paused beside me, his voice so low only I could hear it. "Freedom," he said, "is the rarest form of compound interest. Don't waste it." He turned and was gone. I stood up. I put the binder in my tote bag. I looked at the three of them, my family, the producer, ruined, the director, dethroned, the star, broken. I said nothing. I walked out of the dining room. I walked down the long, cold foyer. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing night air. The moment I shut the door of my old, rusting car, I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. The agreement was signed. The clock was running. T-7 days. T-6. The countdown had begun. The countdown was a silent, vibrating hum beneath the surface of my new life. T-7 days. T-6. I started my job at Halloway. Ridge Talbot. I walked out of the Fishtown loft, leaving the key on the counter, and moved into the new apartment in Society Hill. The $40,000 signing bonus hit my account like a lightning strike, clearing my credit card debt and my student loans in a single afternoon. I bought a new suit. I bought new boots. I bought a coffee machine that worked. For 6 days. I worked. I learned the systems at HRT. I was assigned to a massive consumer fraud case, and I buried myself in discovery documents, my mind sharp and focused, fueled by good coffee and the absence of financial terror. And all the while, the clock ticked. T-3 days, silence. T-1 day, silence. T-0. The deadline was 5 p.m. I sat at my new, polished desk in my new, quiet office, watching the clock on my computer screen. 4:59 p.m. I logged into my bank. The $62,400 in my Utema account sat there, untouched. The $37,600 had not arrived. 5 p.m. The deadline passed. They had defaulted. They had called my bluff. They thought that because I had a new job, because I was gone, I would let it go. They had, once again, fatally underestimated me. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I opened my email and wrote a message to my new boss, Archer Talbot, summarizing the situation and the default. His reply was instant. "Conference room B, 10 minutes. He wasn't angry. He looked amused. He had HRT's top courier dispatch a formal notice of intent to file suit, sent directly to the Wynwood house, demanding a final settlement conference. Not at their home, not at a neutral location, on my turf, 8 p.m., tonight, in my conference room. I sat at the head of a mahogany table that was twice as long as the one in my parents' dining room. The lights were low, the view of the city skyline glittering behind me. This was a room built for high-stakes, multi-million-dollar corporate warfare. Archer Talbot sat at my right hand, not as my lawyer, but as a senior partner facilitating an internal matter. He was a shark, smelling blood, and he was curious to see how his new associate hunted. Aunt Maura sat at my left, her notary ledger open, her presence a silent, powerful statement. At 8:05 p.m., they arrived. Vivian and Graham. They looked 10 years older. Graham's suit was rumpled. Vivian's face was pale, the makeup unable to hide the deep, terrified exhaustion. And they had a lawyer with them, a small, nervous man from a Wynwood family firm, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ms. Green," the lawyer began, his voice reedy. "My clients, they wish to resolve this, but they are constrained. They have had significant financial setbacks." "You defaulted," I said. "They propose a new payment plan," the lawyer forged on, ignoring me. "To show good faith, $500 a month, until the debt is satisfied." Archer Talbot let out a short, sharp laugh. $500, counselor. That's not a proposal. That's an insult. At that rate, not counting interest, it would take over 6 years to repay the initial sum. The offer is rejected. We'll be filing the full suit, civil RICO, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and forgery tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. "Now, wait," the lawyer stammered. "There's no need to be hostile." The conference room door opened. Eamon Caldwell entered. He nodded to Archer Talbot. They knew each other. Of course they did. "Eamon," Talbot said, a flicker of a smile on his face. "Glad you could make it." "Father," Vivian whispered, her face ashen. "I heard you missed the deadline," Eamon said, his voice casual. He ignored his daughter and looked at Graham. "A pity. I had a small incentive arranged." A gesture of goodwill, I had instructed Caldwell Trust to transfer a matching fund $37,600 into Penelope's UTEMA. If your payment had arrived on time, a reunification bonus. Since you failed, my offer, as of 5:01 p.m., is permanently withdrawn. You didn't just default on your debt, you lost the profit. Graham looked like he was going to be sick. He had not only failed to pay, he had lost an equal amount. The lawyer was spluttering. "This is highly irregular." When the door opened again, Tate Ellison, he was alone, dressed in a perfect bespoke suit, and he was carrying a slim black leather-bound report. "Tate," Vivian said, a desperate, pathetic flare of hope in her voice. He cut her off with a cold look. "Vivian." He ignored everyone else and looked directly at me. "Ms. Green, my apologies for the interruption." He placed the bound report on the table, the cover, embossed in silver, read simply, "Kroll." "My audit is complete," he said. "It seems your evidence binder was incomplete." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "You listed Exhibit F as the fraudulent internal loan agreement, signed by your mother as guardian. My forensic accountants found something you missed, an Exhibit G." He opened the report and slid a single document across the polished table. It was a wire transfer request from the UTMA, dated 2 years prior, an authorization for $9,800, paid to a vendor in Miami I had never heard of, and at the bottom, the signature line. It was not Vivian Hartley, guardian. It was a meticulous, near-perfect forgery of my own signature. "Penelope Green. This," Tate said, his voice flat, "is not just a breach of fiduciary duty. As Mr. Talbot noted, this is a Class B felony, forgery and identity theft. In this state, that carries a mandatory minimum sentence." The room went silent. The sound of the HVAC system was a sudden roar. Felony, mandatory minimum, prison. These were the words that finally broke the director. Vivian Hartley made a small, strangled, gulping sound. Her mask of composure, her rage, her dignity had all dissolved. She collapsed forward, her head hitting the table with a dull thud, and she began to sob. Not the strategic, manipulative sobs I had seen before, but the ugly, raw, terrified sobs of a cornered animal. Her lawyer looked at the forgery, then at his client, and visibly deflated. He was done. Graham, his face gray, rose from his chair, his hands shaking. "Wait, please, not criminal. Don't. Please, Penelope, don't send her to prison. She didn't know what she was signing. It was me. I'll take responsibility. We'll sell the house. We'll give you everything. Just, please, not that." The door, which Tate had left open, creaked. June was standing there. She looked like a ghost. She had been listening from the hallway. She walked in, ignoring her parents, and stopped at the end of the table. She looked only at me. "Penelope," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'll get a job. A real job. I'm applying at a restaurant, to wait tables. I'll give you my paycheck. All of it. I'll pay you back. I'll never touch anything of yours again. I swear." It was the first honest promise she had ever made. I looked at them, the entire ruined cast, my father, pleading, my mother, broken, my sister, finally, painfully, awake. I had the kill shot. Archer Talbot was watching me, his expression unreadable, waiting to see what kind of lawyer he had just hired. Eamon Caldwell was watching me, impassive. This was my choice. "I am not interested in prison," I said. The words dropped into the silence. "I am interested in compliance." I took the old, defaulted settlement and tore it in half. New terms, the original $37,600, plus the $9,800 for the forgery. The total is $47,400. "We don't have that," Graham whispered. 50%, I said. $23,700. It will be in my account within 24 hours. The remaining 50% will be paid in 6 equal monthly installments. If you miss a single payment, by 1 day, by $1, this agreement is void, and Mr. Talbot will file the full criminal and civil complaint. I looked at all three of them. "And I want a formal letter of apology, signed by all three of you, notarized by Aunt Maura, admitting to the misappropriation and the forgery." I added one last thing. "And the wedding remains canceled, indefinitely, until the final cent is paid." "We can't get that much in 24 hours, Graham pleaded, his voice breaking. Tate Ellison, who had been watching this entire exchange with a cold, analytical eye, stepped forward. "Yes, you can." He looked at Graham. "I will wire the $23,700. It is not a gift. It is a high-interest loan. To you, secured by a first-position lien on the Wynwood house, which my lawyers will file tomorrow. You will accept my terms." He wasn't saving them. He was just replacing Eamon as their primary creditor. He was securing his investment. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen. "The transfer is initiated." I slid the new, ironclad agreement, which Archer Talbot's assistant had drafted while we waited, onto the table. "Sign." They signed. Graham, his hand shaking so hard he could barely hold the pen. Vivian, her signature a dead, angry scrawl. June, a quick, small stroke. Aunt Maura stood up. She took her ledger. She had each of them sign it. Then, she took the agreement. She lifted her heavy steel embosser. Clack. She stamped it. A second time. Clack. The sound of finality. Archer Talbot signed as the witness. The deal was done. They left. Graham was supporting Vivian, who looked like she couldn't walk. June followed behind them, alone. Eamon Caldwell and Archer Talbot nodded to each other. "She's a natural. Eamon. She's a Caldwell. Archer. Eamon turned to me. He was holding the cheap laminated clipboard from the plasma clinic. He set it down in my hands. You don't need to sell your blood for self-respect anymore. Granddaughter, he said. He almost smiled. You just learned how to draw it. He nodded once, and then he was gone. I stood alone in the conference room. I was exhausted. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The empty city streets dark and cold. I stood on the pavement, the freezing night air hitting my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A notification from my bank. Deposit received $23,700. I looked at the number. The first payment, half of my stolen life, returned. Freedom isn't loud. It isn't a party. It's not a banner. It's just a bank transfer, arriving exactly on time. I took a deep, cold breath, and for the first time in my entire life, my lungs felt completely full. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories and like this video. And if this story resonated with you, please smash that hype button to help it get heard by more people.